I need this, I need that, take me here, take me there kind of stuff. But it was just so stressful. And then finally, I looked it up and he said, you know what? You're going to make more on retirement than you're making what you're making in a salary. And he just said, retire early. That's, and I worked a couple of months and got my Social Security and my paycheck.
Bye.
And did that for about 4 months. And then we decided to pick a date. I picked my birthday and
it's a good thing, isn't it, not to work.
It has been heaven ever since.
So, Mary Lou, I see that you're joined us. We are about ready to begin, I think.
Okay, good.
Any
good
prayer
evening,
requests?
everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
We're in the comfy chairs today. We've made a decision.
Good.
So your sister, right? And
yes, Stella. Lucy. I'm sorry.
Lucy. Continued prayers for Lucy. Let me think. Gonna continue. I kind of forgot to put her in the prayers last week, and Esther Veteran Jack, who comes to church, she sits in the back with the Gausses. She's in rehab still, so she definitely needs some prayers. She got horribly sick. We're going to continue to pray, and I'm going to throw in the Manor household only because everyone's gotten sick in that household this week. So all 4 kids, so it's been kind of tough. So pray that it doesn't hit Regina, because that'd be the worst, Any other prayers? I think Jeanette is still in Italy, so
she's coming back soon, or
maybe she'll just stay there. Who knows? Maybe she fell in love with it and she's gonna stay there. I don't know.
You never know. Well, our usual with Christine and
certainly
her situation, and Ben with all kinds of jobs and faith.
Yeah. We'll pray that Jill does well with her new job. We'll continue to bring healing for her. And
absolutely, yes.
I think that's good enough for starting this Bible study. Heavenly Father, I want to give thanks and praise to you, Lord, for just the good gifts that you give us. Lord, the fact that we know that without you we'd be lost, and that you've given us life through Jesus Christ. Lord, I pray that you would be with those on our prayer list this evening. I want to continue to lift up Lucy, bring her healing. Esther in rehab, grant her strength, Lord, to just be able to get out of the rehab place and be able to go home soon. Mm-hmm. We pray for the Manor household as they continue to deal with illness, and I pray, Lord, that period of illness would soon end for them, and that they'd be just restored to full strength. Be with Ben, and Lord, just help him with his job concerns, Lord, and just help him, bring him closer to you. We pray for Christine, Lord, that you would grant her, Lord, just answers to prayers, and Lord, just be close by her and her husband as they walk together. I want to also lift up Jill and give thanks, Lord, that you have given her a job. And Lord, as she's working that job, I pray that she, Lord, finds fulfillment in it, and that it helps her, and that you continue to bring her healing. All these prayer requests we ask in the name of your Son, Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so Bob joined us while we were praying, so very good. We've got pretty much everyone here except for, Jeanette, who's, as we were saying, has abandoned us for Italy. More fun, Anyway, so we're continuing with Judges 9, and this is where it starts to really get quote-unquote good, good is if you're like me and you just have a very sick fascination with, true crime stuff, because, there's a lot of intrigue. There's going to be a lot of stuff. And, just thinking about it this morning, this chapter kind of marks a point. We've seen things kind of start to slowly denigrate. Gideon wasn't perfect, Well, now we're going to get into some judges that definitely make some questionable choices. The question for tonight with Abimelech is he even a judge? Because and that's something to keep in mind, because the word's not applied to him, and as we read, you'll see it's for good reason. If anything, as we read the next few chapters, you might be like, what's the point of this? God's people just acting horribly. And if previous chapters we've focused on the fact that, God's saints are still sinners, maybe here the best thing that we can pull out is that God even works through, not so nice people. He does bring us deliverance even in not favorable circumstances. And not just that, but it helps remind us of humanity's state. When we talk about the fall into sin, I feel like chapters like this really are only shocking if we forget about the fact that, we believe in this thing called total depravity, where humanity, chooses naturally to sin. It's just, that's why I think, as a, not to get too political, as an economic system, I think the reason why, Christianity and capitalism work together is because Christianity acknowledges that's human nature, to care about, their bottom line. It's really only with the church, with God, with his instruction, that provisions for things like charity come in. God commands us to do such things. So we'll see that. We'll just get into it, because we're going to read about Abimelech, the son of Gideon, that is Jerubbaal, just reminding you, because you might have forgotten with me being sick last week. So we're going to start, let's do 9 through, or chapter 9, 1 through 15, I think is a good.
Okay. That's been done.
Well, maybe we should just read the whole chapter. I don't know. Do you have the endurance?
Wow.
I
can do this.
For 20-something verses? Or
the whole chapter? This is 20 verses? That's a lot more than 20 verses.
Is it?
57.
57 verses.
Oh, no, let's do 21. 21 okay. As much, sorry.
All right. Abimelech's conspiracy. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on the behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went to his father's house in Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar of Shechem.
I think that's actually a good place to stop, because there's already a lot to unpack. The intrigue has already started. Abimelech wastes no time. I mean, he's not even, the son of Jerubbaal's wife. Remember last chapter when we're introduced to to Abimelech, he's introduced, I believe, as the son of one of the concubines. Mm-hmm. So not Gideon's wife. And what name does she give him? Abimelech, which, as we said last time, means my father is the king. Okay, Gideon didn't call himself king. And if Gideon acted like a king, remember, he was timid at first, but God made him, bold, and then I think Gideon made himself a little overbold. But at least he, tried. He set up this ephod, which was false worship, but at least his heart's in the right place. And he says, no, God is the king. I'm not going to take up the kingship for myself. For the son of a concubine to say, my father is the king, he's laying a claim already, I think. Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem. So, and it sounds like, Shechem is where actually the ark ended up, I believe. I don't know if it's at this time, but before it ended up in the temple in Jerusalem, the ark kind of rested in Shechem. Is what the place is called.
But isn't this place like full of Canaanites?
Yes, it is full of Canaanites right now. And they're worshiping Baal-berith. The Israelites are falling into idolatry of this Baal-berith, Baal-berith. Abimelech is saying, hey, Gideon kind of was in control before, and he has 70 sons. Do you want all 70 sons to be a thorn in your side, or do you maybe just want one? And Abimelech, whose mother is the concubine, he's their flesh and blood. His flesh and blood through Gideon, those are the 70 brothers. This is his flesh and blood through his mother, the concubine. He's saying, hey, I'm your people, and they say, okay, and they do say he is our brother, and they gave him 70 pieces of silver, so they, give him some money, tribute, and he uses it to hire, and I love how just the detail here, worthless and reckless fellows. This isn't Gideon, right? Gideon, find the 300 men who, the Lord is going to prove with that, God is in control. First of all, there's, who's been absent? God, right? This Abimelech has said nothing about God. He's not fighting in the name of the Lord. He's not, fighting these Shechemites. He's not he's not rising up to save Israel from them. Instead, he's, seeking his own gain. He hires these worthless and reckless fellows,
But maybe the purpose of this in here is that this is a follow-up to Gideon.
Yeah.
Because this is the end result of Gideon.
Yeah. His and that's actually very interesting. The Bible does talk about that, in terms of the commandments. Moses said, God, I'm sitting here right now, for some reason, the quote that is in our catechisms, it's in our catechisms and I can't remember it. God promises steadfast love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments, but will punish to the 3rd and 4th generation. That's it. Of those who despise me. And, Gideon, his heart's in the right place, but, he's very careless. He walks away from God's covenantal law, and what ends up happening as a result is that you have this Abimelech rise up. And Abimelech is not a man who's been obviously received instruction. It's not even like, okay, yes, you had a son with a concubine, but at least you raised him, to be part of the people. No, he's... which, it's questionable if Gideon should have taken a concubine. This is Gideon, as you're saying, it's like, is it really, when people talk about the Old Testament, they'll say, oh, the Bible glorifies, things like concubines and whatnot. But where in the Bible has there ever been something good that's happened from, bigamy? Never. Abraham had a whole lot of problems with Hagar and with Ishmael, and the world is still dealing with the sons of Ishmael.
It's acknowledgement. It's not glorifying. It's just saying this is the way it was.
This is what happened.
Yeah.
And there are times where God, does make provisions. And when God does make provisions, it's not like he's giving his rubber stamp. He's saying, if you do this, you're not, God will avenge you if you mistreat this person. God protects Hagar, for instance, after Abraham conceives with Sarah, his wife, he protects her because, that's just God's love. He actually warns the Israelites, if you do these things, beware, because if you mistreat the sojourner, if you mistreat those who, even if you have people who are indebted to you and slaves, God makes it clear you're supposed to forgive their debts after 7 years. Every 7 years, they had this year of jubilee.
Yep.
So I think you're right, John. This is consequences. It says nothing about that this Abimelech is judging Israel. It's his own plans. And what are his plans? He goes to his father's house at Ophrah and kills his brothers, except for one, Jotham, which, if anything, he almost takes on we'll read this next. He actually almost takes a prophetic role. I think that's where we're going to continue 7 through 15.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and cried aloud and said to them, "Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Shall I leave my abundance by which gods and men are honored and go hold sway over the trees?' And the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go hold sway over the trees?' And the trees said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'"
So, and maybe just continue to read on, because he does kind of explain himself.
Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserve, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer and lived there because of Abimelech his brother.
So, very, and this is actually an example of a parable. When we think of parables, we think of Jesus, right? He told a lot of parables. Yeah. But Jotham, the son that survives, actually, tells a parable here. There's another example of an Old Testament parable, by the way, when you get to David, and that's with Nathan the prophet, and he says, "Hey, this is after David commits adultery." He says, "Hey, this man, you're a shepherd. Help me settle this. There's a man who went and, found, this sheep, and he killed, his neighbor for this sheep." And David says, he's like, "What should we do to this man?" He says, "Oh, you should bring the wretch to me so I can kill him." And that's when Nathan says, "You're the man." So this is another parable. And this parable has a lot to do with kind of what we've read so far in Judges, because we started with Othniel, who was a very righteous judge, very close to the initial conquest of Canaan, married, Caleb's daughter. And so if you remember, Caleb was one of the two good spies. He's kind of in, and that's kind of where this is going. It says, hey, we had fig trees and we had, vines, and we had all sorts of good people who could have been leaders, and they said, no, I'm not going to be king. And really, if anything, this also goes back to Gideon. Gideon refused to call himself king. Even though he acted a lot like it, he still had some decency intact. And so that's really the point here. The olive tree doesn't leave its abundance. The fig tree does it. Neither does the vine, but it's the bramble, which, that's, worthless stuff. Kind of a theme here, Abimelech and his worthless fellows. This worthless bramble says, yep, I'll reign over you. And notice this idea of good faith comes up. Jotham says, is it really in good faith that you're asking him to be king, letting him be king, or are you thinking of yourself? In the same way that Abimelech is really just thinking of himself. So if you've acted in good faith and integrity, fine. Let him be your king. But if not, and let it be in recognition of what my father has done, because, and notice that was a point in the last chapter. As flawed as Gideon was, it does, part of what God kind of is pointed out, when we look, that after after Gideon died, the people turn again and hoard after the Baals, made Baal Berith their god, and they forgot. They did not show steadfast love. They forgot Jerubbaal. They forgot Gideon's family. And so what, Jotham is doing is he's saying, hey, remember what my family did when you had these horrible kings. He chased them out and was able to conquer. And is this how you repay our household? So, very good point. Jotham kind of comes in. He kind of fills a prophetic role. He's not judging Israel, though. He's just a son of Gideon, and he flees, because, he's probably, after dropping that kind of, fire on them, like, hey,
Well, you almost have to think that Jotham was kind of a judge himself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's pronouncing, God's judgment in a way. He's saying, hey, if this is how you're going to repay me, then, fire will come to you. So beware. And notice this is the first time God is mentioned, in this entire chapter. He says early on, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. So that's the first time God has really been, mentioned so far. And we're 7 verses in, and it's nothing to do with Abimelech. So, so far nothing good about Abimelech has been brought forward. But there's more to this tale, and I think we should definitely get into it because...
how far we go down now?
I'm trying to figure out a good stop, like midway point here, because this is like 20-something verses. Ugh.
How about down to 41?
Let's do that.
Okay. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way, and it was told to Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, moved into Shechem with his relatives, and the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. And they went out into the field and gathered the grapes from their vineyards and trod them and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and reviled Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech? And who are we of Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Would that this people were under my hand. Then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to Abimelech, Increase your army and come out. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem, and they are stirring up the city against you. Now therefore go by night, you and the people who are with you, and set an ambush in the field. Then in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may do to them as your hand finds to do. So Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city, and Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the mountaintops. And Zebul said to him, You mistake the shadow of the mountains for men. Gaal spoke again and said, Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak. Then Zebul said to him, Where is your mouth now, you who said, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them. And Gaal went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Aramah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not dwell at Shechem.
So political intrigue at its finest. I mean, really, Abimelech is ousted. You know, he's... Notice the detail. It starts off, it doesn't say that he judged Israel for 3 years. It says he ruled Israel. So far, the only people who have ruled Israel have not been Israelites. First, they've been kings who've horribly oppressed the Israelites. And the thing is, this is really where we start to see what happens. You know, when a nation abandons God, they start looking like all the other nations. You know, and the depth of depravity that they fall into, you know, knows really no bounds. And if you think that this is bad so far, this is just political intrigue, right? It gets much worse, and it is going to get much worse. About 9 chapters later, we're going to find out how deep Israel sinks. But, the fact that Jerubbaal, son of Abimelech, just in one generation, all of the other sons have been dispatched. And now the people of Shechem, who are Canaanites, who are worshiping, this false Baal Berith, they're conspiring against him, and they succeed in that. So, any observations here? Instead,
they just had basically a little civil war in this town.
Yeah, they did.
4 companies, so I'd have to say 400 men? If you looked at a company as 100 men,
yeah.
How big is a company back then? Maybe it's a lesser amount.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, I mean, I don't know how big Shechem was, but they lost a lot of men that day.
Yeah.
So that had an effect on the town.
In the Bible. Okay, so I asked Google quickly how big was a company in the Bible, and it's saying 12 tips for success for your Christian. I'm like, oh God, that's not what that's not the information I needed.
50 ads. Okay, let's keep reading.
No, but good stuff. I mean, good observations, right? And where did this really result from? It goes back to Gideon. and his sin, his ephod that they hoard after, that allowed after Gideon's death, the worship of God ceased, and because they had this pagan and foreign worship in form of this ephod, they start worshiping a pagan god. And it's, there's much to be said, as Lutherans about, the medieval Roman church, how they were getting to that with all the days for the saints. Last week we had Halloween, right? And in the Catholic Church, there's 2 days that they celebrate, All Saints Day and All Souls Day. And, we Lutherans, we just do All Saints Day. All Hallows means all hallows, all people who are saints. And it's really, these are the kind of verses that because Luther read, Judges, and he looks at it and he says, this is the, exactly the result of this false worship, of instituting these things. Wars happen. They happened back then. They happened in the Reformation period. Wars still happen today. Yep. And, unfortunately, there's a human cost that comes with that. So I agree we should definitely continue because there's more violence and bloodshed. So Abimelech is driven out of Shechem. He's no longer ruling as king, but, he still has a following. So we'll see what he does with that. 42
they drove
to
out,
the end.
They drove out Gale.
They did. Oh, yeah. So he's with his people, Okay.
And his relatives. They drove them all out. Okay, on the following day, the people went out into the field, and Abimelech was told. He took his people and divided them into 3 companies and set an ambush in the fields. And he looked and saw the people coming out of the city. So he rose against them and killed them. Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while the 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the field and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it, and he razed the city and sowed it with salt. Wow, this guy's hardcore, man.
Yes.
When all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem heard of it, they entered the stronghold of the house of El-Berith. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem were gathered together, and Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwood and took it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done." So every one of the people cut down his bundle and followed Abimelech, put it against the stronghold, and they set the stronghold on fire over them, so that all the people of the Tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women and all the leaders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in. And they went up to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him." And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. Thus God returned the evil to Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal.
So, we find here, this is really the twist to the story. That, this is, this is how kind of what happens. The end result is that, Abimelech, he dies in a very treacherous, way. And it's not just that, I guess for him as someone who's the king, fighting, there's that embarrassment, okay, that a woman, crushed him, and so he has to avoid that by being run through, which, remember earlier, one of the kings that was early on, one of the early judges, I forget which one, remember, doesn't end up killing the king, but instead it's this woman who runs a stake through the king. That was an earlier story, where it's kind of come full circle. This person who is trying to be a leader of Israel, but really isn't, ends up dying this, inglorious death. He, ends up raising the town. He ends up, at the same time, God, at the end, 56 and 57, really where we have to maybe struggle a little bit, God returns the evil to Abimelech. God punishes evil. And that's just part of what we have to kind of come to terms with. When we talk about the total depravity of man, we have to also understand the holiness of God, that he doesn't quite tolerate, these things. He puts up with judges who are weak, who at least have faith, right? That's why Gideon, lives a long life. And unfortunately, though, as a unfortunate result of Gideon's sin, and then or Abimelech killing all of his children except for one, Jotham. Well, nothing good came from it in the end. So, any other comments, questions? I mean, because
I got two.
Yes.
Okay, so the point is, Abimelech's side, all his men departed to their house, so they just basically scattered.
Yeah.
On his side,
and it kind of shows that these are Israelites, who are with him.
There must have been a feeling there that they had gone too far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they all took off running. Oh God, he's dead. What are we gonna do now?
Well, he's no longer there. There's no more king, right?
Yeah. All right, and then the other one is that you killed all the brothers but one. Now, when Israel went into Israel, they were supposed to kill everyone,
right?
But they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of like, I don't know, something along the same lines. I just see that.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what ends up happening. We're going to see it with another judge that comes up in a little bit, where in the end, God does work his purpose through this. The pagan peoples who were doing just horribly wicked things. Everything from temple prostitution to human sacrifices. The Bible does not fully expound on what archaeology has since found about how the Canaanites were living, and some of these things were quite wicked. So God's return, punishing, and he does bring that to these people. So, I think those are good observations that, in a way, God's people did not get rid of all of the people God told them to. And then you have this Abimelech come up who is trying to be a king over Israel, and he's really not even fully part of Israel. He's, kills 70 legitimate sons, except for, one, and it kind of all turns around. So, but notice, he's not described as having been a judge, because God has nothing to do with Abimelech's, the way Abimelech served. So
this is why I think that he's just a follow-through on Gideon. You know?
And really, that's a good observation. And there are a couple places where we don't hear about a judge, and we're about to get to that a little bit into chapter 10, which is, I think where we're going to continue tonight, because we're going to get a follow-up on the fact that Israel is continuing to do these evil things. And it's funny, and yet, chapter 10, it's going to say, after Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola. And it almost sounds like the implication is, well, after Abimelech, because he did kind of save Israel, but not as a judge. I don't know, because if I've looked this up online, and unfortunately, I couldn't find, my question that I had in my head simply was, is Abimelech considered a judge? And I really could not find anything Maybe I should have read my commentaries again. I did a lot of that work last week.
Does it say anything in here?
No, it doesn't.
No. Yeah, that's what the Lutheran Study Bible, I looked at that, and, it doesn't really tell me that Abimelech was a judge. It just, some people say he was. Some people say he really wasn't.
But
I know.
All the other chapters talk about God being with them,
the judge.
giving them directions. And
the only way that God was with Abimelech in any way is that there was an evil spirit between them, and that doesn't really sound like God with them. It really sounds like, and this is part of what we talk about, God's permissive will. He, kind of lets them get all of their aggression out on each other. Because, God is perfectly willing to let us, as creatures who have free will, quote unquote, go down the path of destruction. And yet, he's willing to put up with a lot if we actually have faith and trust in him. That's kind of got to be the turn that we take, because we're going to read about some judges that don't sound too different than Abimelech. And yet the difference between them is faith. That, Hebrews 11 gives a great rhapsody on the faith of Jephthah. We're going to read about Jephthah making a huge mistake, doing something very sinful. Gideon is mentioned as being a saint. Samson, who, we're going to read all about Samson's imperfections. So that's a good point,
I can't help but wonder today, because there are a lot of young men becoming priests for the Jews. I mean, over there and here too. But how do they study this?
A lot of it is that they don't. That's kind of the dirty secret of rabbinic Judaism, is that a lot of it's based on studying things like the Talmud, studying, it's really studying commentaries of commentaries of commentaries. It's the tradition, that they were kind of raised up in. And it's the same thing that we see in Jesus's day with the Pharisees, where it's about having the appearance of following the law. And I have a friend who's a pastor who told me this story to give an example. He was a caterer, and he had 2 big catering jobs in the same night. Same menu, except one was a party of, Jews, and it was supposed to be a kosher meal. The other was the same meal, but with pork. There was a little mix-up. And after the meal, he approaches the rabbi and he says, "We have a problem." And the rabbi just tells him, "If there's not a problem," because he kind of starts to explain. He says, "Well, if nobody knows, there really isn't a problem."
They probably liked it.
If nobody knows, there isn't a problem. And that's kind of the, that gets to the gist of it. It's really, more about skirting the rules than obedience. But this isn't really about that, about modern Judaism. This is about Israel at this time. Just as imperfect as the church is today, because Old Testament Israel, its modern equivalent is the church, filled with saints who are also sinners. So we'll start reading chapter 10. So let's just read the first 5 verses, because I think this will settle, is Abimelech a judge or not, at least in my mind.
After the time of Abimelech, a man of Issachar, Tola son of Puah, the son of Dodo, rose to save Israel. He lived in Shamir I'm reading the wrong book. After Abimelech there arose to save Israel Tola the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years, and he died and was buried at Shamir. After him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died, and he was buried in Kaman.
So, this is more details that probably made a lot more sense to the people who lived back then, because they said, "Oh, I've been to Havoth Jair," and you kind of learn a fun fact through that. And keep in mind, the book of Judges, these are not just tales that appear out of nowhere. These are tales that, things that happened and were written down. And unfortunately, these are minor judges. We have quite a few of them. They pop up and we learn these kind of funny details. I forget which judge it was, but we're told, that he killed 10,000 men with an ox goad, right? That's all we learn. And here we learn about Jair and his 30 sons who have 30 donkeys. Not much details, but the important thing here is how they're described in a way that Abimelech wasn't, that I think gives credence to what John is saying. It's a follow-up to Gideon, because it doesn't say that Abimelech judged. It does say that, after Abimelech, someone rose to save Israel. And part of what Abimelech did result in the salvation of Israel a little bit, in that the Shechemites who were there, who were part of these people who were oppressing God's people, falsely worshiping, false gods, leading the people astray. God did punish them through Abimelech. At the same time, Abimelech wasn't a judge. Tola, this guy that we don't know anything about, is a judge, and he is a saint. And Jair and the 30 sons of the 30 donkeys are too. Now here's more of the good part. Verse 6 on, we're going to continue to read. Let's try to do the end of the chapter so we can say we did 2 chapters. We're just going to see how, God's people, in spite of God constantly raising these judges, they fall back into bad stuff. So do we have a reader?
Sure. Further disobedience and oppression. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. And the Ammonites crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, "We have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals." And the Lord said to the people of Israel, "Did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites, from the Ammonites and from the Philistines? The Sidonians also, and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress." And the people of Israel said to the Lord, "We have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, only please deliver us this day." So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he became impatient over the misery of Israel. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead."
So, chapter 10, really, this chapter almost serves as an interlude. And it's interesting. We've kind of heard this before, and I'm trying to look right now where that was, where God directly tells Israel, "Hey, didn't I rescue you from Egypt, and you're serving these gods?" But nonetheless, here it's kind of a midway point through this book, and we see that Israel is continuing this cycle, right? Because with all the intrigue that came from Abimelech and from Gideon, we kind of forgot the cycle for a minute where this is all happening really not because it really doesn't just go back to Gideon, and his effort. It doesn't just go back to how any of the other judges were not perfect. It doesn't even really go to the small things. Here, God's, main issue with the Israelites, when they are, oppressed by the Philistines, really what God is telling them, hey, you want the gods of these nations. And really, there's a reason why, in kind of thinking about what would cause them to do this, well, they're chasing after gods that are promising temporal security. The God of Israel is promising them eternal security, and he's giving them a promise of, I will be your God, you will be my people. But what do false gods offer? I mean, when you look at who Baal was, who Ashtaroth was, and a lot of the other gods, all of these gods represent fertility, fertility, monetary prosperity. And these are things that we kind of worship today in a different way. We look to those things for our comfort and security. And God's response is, hey, go cry to these gods. See if they will rescue you. You wanted the Ammonites. You wanted these gods. You didn't drive these people away like I told you to. And so you can have them. But I think the most important thing here is that, God's not giving up a big list of commandments and rules in Leviticus that the people broke. If anything, he's sticking to one commandment, the first commandment. This whole chapter goes back to that first commandment. God recalls what he has done. Didn't I save you from the Egyptians? From the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Sidonians, the Amalekites? The list has grown bigger since they've gone into the promised land. And he says, I saved you, yet you've forsaken me and served other gods. That's God's primary concern. As the church, we have to kind of keep that the main thing, I think, today. I think there is a huge tie-in to how the church responds to the world today. Sometimes we make the smaller issues to be our purpose for being. And we see this with things like culture warriors, people talking about, this, that, and that is going on in society. The bigger point is, if you serve God and God alone, if you keep the first commandment, which is loving and trusting God with all of your heart, which really for us, the and there is that, believing in Jesus Christ, believing that he died for our sins, the good works that follow that will make some of these issues we focus on a moot point. If we all actually have faith and trust in Christ, and if we're teaching children that, a lot of the issues in society will work themselves out. If we warn them, what the scriptures warn, if we teach, maybe to not get to a too political place, but how do you stop people from, robbing stores in blind daylight? It's if people know that it's actually wrong, if people actually know that this is a sin against God, and actually care about that. If the conscience cares whether or not it's offended God in the first place, I think that's really where it starts. But that can't happen if we're serving other gods. If the purpose of life is just to try not to hurt people, well, you could make a case that the person who's clearing the shelf on Walmart, they're just hurting a corporation. Yeah, there are effects that come from that. The area that they live in gets poorer. I saw a TikTok person complaining that it took them an hour to get, a piece of makeup, some makeup that they wanted because everything was locked up. They lived in California. Well, that's the result of But we focus on, here I am making that the issue. The main issue that God is concerned with is, do you believe and trust in me? Do you have faith in me? Do you serve me, or are you going to serve these other gods? And what happens, the people, they confess their sin. We have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, accepting that, it's in God's hands. Only please deliver us this day. And verse 16 is where we see that turn. The cycle moves from God's people in just horrible disobedience. They've called out. Now they've repented. And we're told that Israel does put away the foreign gods from among them. They serve the Lord. And the beautiful thing in verse 16 is we hear that God becomes impatient over the misery of Israel. God is impatient when his own people suffer, when his church suffers. And he might allow that for a period of time, but if there's true faith, he's not going to allow it to go on forever. And that's part of God's discipline that maybe we don't like hearing about, that, this might be happening, to me, and I know the exact reason why. But God is impatient when we have true faith, over our misery. He sees that, and he does bring us deliverance. And in this case, we kind of get a prelude to next week. The Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead, and the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. They're preparing for a battle. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over the inhabitants of Gilead." At the same time, let's note that they're looking at a person and for a person instead of, for God. But God does provide them a person. And I'll just read verse 11:1 to conclude tonight, because it'll give us a kind of a good feeling of where we're going. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. So Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So, we've got someone who has a pedigree. He's a lot like Abimelech, but we're going to see next week how he differs, how he's kind of the same, and yet, how even though Abimelech wasn't counted as a judge, we're going to see that Gilead is or rather Jephthah is a judge. He's a saint. And it's actually it's kind of easier for us, I think. It'll be easier for us to walk away tonight because we're like, well, Abimelech didn't care about God at all, so let him get his comeuppance. But when we actually read about what Jephthah ends up doing, we're going to have a very hard time accepting that God is even willing to save this person, that God saves Israel through this person, that he calls this person to be judged. So I hope I've juiced you up for next week enough, because it's going to be...
Yeah, one thing to add.
Yes.
Well, in this book here, it talks about the Ammonite nation was at its peak during the period of the judges.
Right.
And the people were descendants of Ammon, who conceived when Lot's daughter slept with her drunk father.
Yep.
Okay?
Yes.
And then Moab is the other sister. Which
Moab literally means of the father in Hebrew, so in Canaanite languages. So, I'm sure it meant something else to the Moabites, but the way that the Israelites knew them, they probably said, yeah, you are true Moabites. You are of the father who, you're a nation produced from sin, and that's a very good point. Lot is another story that you struggle with, in Sodom and Gomorrah and what comes of that. We're seeing it here in Judges. If you've ever read that story and wondered whatever happened to Lot and his family after that weird thing where his daughters sleep with him in the cave, and now you know the answer: nothing good. Nothing good came of it. So anyways, good points, and we'll read about Jephthah next week. So We'll conclude with the Lord's Prayer, as always. Our Father,
Who
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, good night, everyone on the call. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bob, I didn't even know you were there. You didn't read the whole time. How's that?
Well, the issue is my screen is pretty big and it jumps around quite a bit, so following it to read is difficult. But that's okay. John did a great job.
Wait, no, John and Kathy, they were great readers tonight, so we're thankful.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Okay. So, good night, and we'll see everyone later.
Good night.
Yes, all right.
Good night.
Good night.